Episode 16 of the Liberty Weekly podcast is brought to you by Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. Sick of losing arguments with your statist friends? Fear no more. Now you can vanquish your intellectual foes with courses taught by top libertarian professors. Tool your intellectual arsenal and enroll today by navigating to www.libertyweekly.net/Liberty Classroom or by following the link in the show notes page.
Net neutrality is a set of policies that are designed to prevent companies and organizations that manage these large shared parts of the internet from imposing any kind of distinctions among different users. It's to prevent anybody from letting certain streams of data go through faster, through a fast lane, where other streams of data go more slowly. It prevents charging prices to people to data streams that use these big trunk lines, depending on how much the users are willing to pay. It essentially treats the internet as a public utility that must be open to all, free to all, no prices can be charged to anybody, and naturally that creates sort of the big mess, the so-called tragedy of the commons that we're all familiar with.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Pat McFarland, and appearing alongside me, as always, is the co-host, Jerry McCullum.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, Jerry, so today we are talking about the FCC and net neutrality, and today, Wednesday, July 12th, is the planned day of protest when it comes to
Day of action.
Day of action, okay. Day of action. So I'm looking at an NPR article here. Forgive us for using NPR, but it was the first one that popped up. And so essentially all of the internet, the major websites on the internet, are protesting the FCC's decision to scale back net neutrality. And this is prompted by the Trump administration. Is that correct?
The Trump administration wants to roll back regulations requiring internet service providers to use net neutrality.
Yeah, so basically, almost every major website is saying that we need net neutrality, and we're here to inform you why we don't need net neutrality.
Or maybe it's a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
But how I would put it is that the principles of net neutrality, in general, the ideas behind them, I think, are ones that are great, and I think that should be upholded by internet service providers.
Okay, yeah.
But they should not be things enforced by law by the FCC.
Yes.
And we can tell from all these major companies and from the big response from the public that at least the principles of net neutrality, the idea that we don't want the internet censored from us, or our access to it limited based on the decisions of gatekeepers at ISPs. We don't want that. It's I described it as the second party and the third party don't want it because you don't want it and the people that you're accessing don't. And I think first off, there's a lot of, for a very long time, people have been writing scare stories about the internet being segmented into like cable packages and things like that. And I don't think that it's certainly possible, but I don't think that this is a very realistic concern because people obviously do not want this. They're the only people who may possibly want this would be internet service providers. And if any provider does implement that within the United States, it would create an incredible opportunity for a competitor. And the solution to the issue of the possibility of of the loss of net neutrality, of the principles of net neutrality, is not regulation. It is the removal of regulations preventing competition in the internet service provider market.
Don't understand why they would do that. Like, why would...
Well, actually, the point to be made that isn't brought up is that if they started doing that, the incredible outcry and demand for a provider that doesn't do that sort of thing would mean that a new person could come onto the scene charging higher prices and not throttling the internet, doing all these terrible things, and they would be extremely popular as long as they're allowed to compete in the market.
Well, my thought would be like, then when people come up with pirate internet or something, they would find a way past it, I think.
And not to mention that there are VPN services and things like that, and which theoretically, like, you could, like, the thing, this kind of thing, though, that turning internet into a cable package is something that's been talked about for probably 10 years.
Yeah.
That people have been raising alarm bells about it happening for probably 10 years or so. And as far as I know, the first time that we've heard of anything like this possibly happening was a couple of years ago when Comcast was, I think, talking about throttling Netflix, but not actually doing it. And so I think that a lot of these concerns about the internet turning into a cable package are overblown. Not to mention that it would create incredible demand for alternatives, either be other ISPs or being something like mesh networks, which I think are probably a pretty long ways away from being a viable alternative.
That'd be like a peer-to-peer kind of internet service.
Yeah.
When you say a cable package for the internet, what do you mean? Like, you would have to pay subscription for certain websites?
So I'm kind of using that as a placeholder. But a lot of what people are concerned about often is, instead of you purchasing internet speeds, instead you're purchasing internet access to different things. So instead of being, I want to have so many megabytes per second, you're saying, I want to be able to access these mainstream news sites and Facebook and YouTube and whatnot. And then I will have to instead pay extra for the second group of websites that I can access, and then pay a premium on top of that to have full access to the entire internet, which to me seems antithetical to how the internet actually works. And I think anyone who, unless an internet service provider truly is completely out of touch with how the internet works, they would understand that, yes, there are fixtures within the internet. There are businesses that stick around, certain websites and businesses that stick around and are important, but the turnover of websites especially of new websites, is so quick that limiting yourself to only be able to have the things that you've deemed as being popular and noteworthy enough would put it would stifle the value of the internet, because the openness of it is one of the things that creates such value. So, if we take an example like BuzzFeed, would these internet service providers know that it would have become such a successful company so many years later, and would have known that people would want it and demanded it? I don't know. And if, let's say there's one ISP that does have these limitations on accessing the rest of the internet, and one that doesn't, all of the new and hip websites would be exclusively available on their competitor. And so if you think about it, it's like, I guess there's just so much, to me, it seems like it'd be incredibly foolish for anyone to do that, because they're hamstringing their service, from what I can tell, only for a reason to charge a much higher price that anyone who I guess uses the internet more than just on a casual basis would immediately demand and want to use. I can't imagine it as a pricing structure that would match consumers at all.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that it's something that isn't really a legitimate concern, although it could happen. But the solution to it is not to start regulating the internet like it's a public good, because I think that has really dangerous implications, and the outcome of it could be far less efficient, less competitive, and a stagnant and calcified internet in 10, 20 years from now.
Well, and we've seen this play out before in history, you know.
Mm-hmm. If you want an example, I guess this is something that we mentioned off the mic, but telephone services are of lower quality than services like Skype. It's a lower sound quality, despite these things being a dedicated service for audio, and it has worse quality than voice over IP services.
But we still use it.
Yeah, but it's still around in some ways. I don't have a landline. I basically only use my cell phone for texting.
Yeah.
I very rarely call, and honestly, is the only reason why I would need, phone minutes most of the time is because other people usually call me using cell networks instead of using a VoIP service. And so, I mean, honestly, the only use to me living in a city, which is not everyone, of course, but the only use for me for regular telephone service is so I'm able to make calls when I'm not on data. The only time it's useful to me is when I'm traveling. I'm speculating here, but I'm just fearful that the internet could become in some way unadaptive to the market because of regulations. For example, just an example right now that I think is a big issue with net neutrality is that it means all data must be treated equal on the platform, and not all data is equal on the internet. Let me explain why. Different priorities need to be given to something that is time sensitive versus things that aren't. So for example, an email, it doesn't matter if that email shows up a second late, but it does matter if the data for a video shows up a second late. So it would make sense for ISPs to discriminate and give different priorities to different kinds of data in order to provide a better service. And net neutrality prohibits that.
This sounds very similar to Obamacare or the Republican replacements, saying that you can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. Well, that's the whole way that the insurance industry runs, essentially, the insurance business.
Mm-hmm.
Or
I wish we could have a different word to describe insurance providers within our country, because they're not insurance providers.
Yeah.
Healthcare insurance does not work like any other kind of insurance in this country.
Well, moreover, we shouldn't be using healthcare, or we shouldn't be using insurance to pay for our healthcare.
To pay for non-catastrophic healthcare sort of thing. So I wish that this is something that is not possible for me in this country, but I wish that I could buy a sort of like catastrophic healthcare coverage only. Like, I want healthcare if my arm breaks, if I get diagnosed with a terminal illness. I want something to cover that. I don't want something to cover doctor's visits, to cover medication to help me sleep at night, or those sort of things. There's a whole list of things that, unfortunately, especially because of requiring prescriptions, that sort of thing, I must use health insurance to pay for these things, but I don't need them. I am a healthy person, and I need health insurance for the rare case that I become extremely unhealthy, like getting hit by a car or something like that. But I can't buy that in this country.
Yeah. Well, in the reason I mentioned that is because now that you've explained, because Jerry knows a lot more about this than I do. And the reason why I mentioned this is because while you were explaining with it, I saw so many parallels, to all the different industries, healthcare, banking, that kind of thing.
I think to use an analogy to healthcare, healthcare is not a right, internet is not a right, but I sincerely want everyone to have access to both. Yeah. And I think that the best way to get access to both is through the free market.
And before we wrap up here with a few important housekeeping announcements, let's pause for a second to hear more about what allows us to bring the podcast to you.
As libertarians, we pride ourselves on obtaining knowledge. Fortunately, we live in an age where the entire wealth of human knowledge is right at our fingertips. For instance, could you imagine if Murray Rothbard had internet access? What about Mises? Karl Menger, anyone? Consequently, the best thing that ever happened to me was discovering that the top libertarian minds of our day do have internet access. And as a result, they have produced things like Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom, which offers 19 complete courses on everything from basic Austrian economics to intro to logic. But the best thing that ever happened to me was also the worst, because now all I do is learn. Now you can also get direct access to the top libertarian minds of today, like Bob Murphy, Kevin Gutzman, Brian McClanahan, and Jeff Herbner. And while you're at it, say goodbye to your friends and family, because you'll be busy. To enroll through our affiliate link, simply navigate to libertyweekly.net/Liberty Classroom, or follow the link in the show notes page below.
To view a special directory containing all of our affiliate products, and to receive some special coupon codes for both our affiliate products and Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom, please check out libertyweekly.net/resources.
And before we get going here, just a few housekeeping measures. A few of you may have noticed that the Liberty Weekly website was down for a day a few days ago. Basically, we're just transferring our hosting, and unfortunately, for some reasons that I won't get into, our backlog is not available anymore of the articles that I wrote over the past year. And if you'd like to look into them, they are still available, I believe, via RSS at actualanarchy.com. We'll see what we can do with that. Also, last week we'd like to thank James Corbett for linking to our episode on economics, eugenics, and the minimum wage in his weekly newsletter. We are very appreciative of that, and we are also honored because obviously James Corbett is a large influence on us as well. So thank you to James. But other than that, we hope that you enjoyed our thoughts on the FCC and the day of action against net neutrality rollbacks. So we hope that you'll join us next time, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.